Good morning, Jacksonville. It is Sunday morning on 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk. We are protecting military families with Chris Brochu, owner of Brochu Law and the Second Opinion. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Scott. How are you doing today?
Doing well, brother.
Awesome. So this morning, I know that Casey is out. This is our first show together. I know we're going to crush it. We're going to be talking about the one of the newest bills floating through Congress right now. It's called the Honoring Our Pact, PACT Act. Essentially, the bipartisan legislation is talking about protecting our military families that have relatives exposed to burn pits and toxic water at Camp Lejeune.
This has been a topic that's been making its way through the news a lot lately.
It really is. It's one of those where you kind of scratch your head and you say, with the amount of money and the amount of blank checks that we cut for every organization, it's hard to believe that we haven't done something for this group of our citizens. I mean, our military families, it's taken way too long, and the trend going from, Vietnam, Agent Orange exposure, then that's in, I think our last troops that left Vietnam was 1972. They didn't start getting any toxic exposure relief until the 90s. Then you have Camp Lejeune water exposure from 53 to 87. Civilian families, military families, veterans, they didn't start getting relief until years later. I think the first Camp Lejeune, the first real comprehensive act didn't come out until 2021. And now you've got, 3.5 million, I would say conservatively, military members that were exposed to toxic burn pits. So the burn pits that these veterans were exposed to in Iraq and Afghanistan, burning tires, burning toxic waste, burning fuel. I believe some of it were limbs, just stuff that a lot of our military families have been affected by. And the tragic part is, in everything the military does, we're so good at as a country at being proactive. But for whatever reason, when we've got toxic water exposure, when we've got Agent Orange, when we've got these things that, it's when you have one person, it's an anomaly. When you've got 3.5 million people exposed to it, it's time to do something about it, because the part of this that nobody sees is the 3.5 million families and spouses and children that will be affected by this, right? If they lose a loved one. And one of
the perspective is never on the people who are out of the spotlight.
Exactly. And one of the main reasons that this has become so important is the fact that we know that it's an issue, and we really can't afford to wait anymore. And if we want to be proactive about it as a country, and again, I didn't serve, right? I don't understand the mentality of our veterans and what they're going through. But I can tell you this, I've got enough clients that fall into these categories that I've seen the negative effects on their families. And one of my clients that I signed recently that was on Fox News with Jon Stewart, his name's Rafael Barbosa. He is the epitome of why we need to do better as a country. Rafael is, absolute stud. He was a pilot in the Army for 23 years. He was on Presidential Guard. And basically what happened is, and again, none of this is privilege. You can see any of this on the news. He's in the papers. He's the VSO Burn Pit 360. I mean, Rafael, he's giving speeches in D.C. on their behalf. I mean, he is spearheading this movement. Jon Stewart, huge proponent. He does a lot of good things for veterans and military families as well. And Burn Pit 360 is really just about, helping these veterans and these families that are not receiving assistance. And in Rafael's case, he ended up having to leave the military because of abdominal pain, and he went and did all the right things, and basically the military misdiagnosed him, right? They said that it was ulcers. It wasn't. It turned out to be stage 4 colon cancer, and it's now terminal, right? So you've got all of these stories, and I've got other clients too. It's unbelievable the amount of sacrifice these families have, and the amount of guts they have and courage they have to keep fighting, right? And hopefully there's something that can be done so that no other family has to go through what Rafael and Amanda Barbosa have gone through. And I think that a good start would be honoring our PACT Act. I think that there are more proactive steps, part of which would be, instead of waiting until someone has multiple myeloma or cancer or something that is terminal or something that's going to require a ton of treatment, right? That's pretty, it's pretty onerous on our taxpayers at that point. And I know that's a big issue for a lot of people. So why not pre-screen them, do the diagnostic testing to catch it beforehand if we know that they're in those toxic areas?
Even setting up something like annual appointments to get baselines and then be able to do comparative analysis against next year's baseline, see if certain enzymes are showing up present in blood, seeing if people are having any kind of odd symptoms since the last time. Anything like that you would think would be just common sense consideration in honor of the people who are writing that blank check with their lives and handing it over and saying, we're here to serve. It baffles me that they don't get that level of service in return.
And not only do they not get that level of service in return, but we leave them out to dry. And this would actually be not only a way to save money, right, taxpayer-wise, but importantly, save lives, right? Because the more cases that we catch on the front end, the more we can help and the more lives that we can save. And with the military families, I can't tell you, I've got about 80% of my clients are military. If you've listened to this show before, I do all military topics. When we do VA disability, service member group life insurance, veterans group life insurance, right? Claims, delays, denials, interpleader. We do military lending, housing. We talk about 3M. We've got some episodes coming up about aviation accidents, court-martial, tons of different military topics. And then we do the civilian ones too, right? Life insurance, the federal employee group life insurance, those delays and denials. And then obviously, the injury cases that people know of, automobile accidents, premises liability. But the one thing that I can't get over is that of all the military clients and military families that I speak with, I never ever get the feeling that somebody feels entitled to these. And I feel it for these military families, but they don't feel that way. They almost feel guilty about calling me and about, fighting for, or appealing their decision. But I think the reality is, as somebody that didn't serve like me, I can take a step back, from 10,000 feet and say, there's a reason why these programs exist, right? And the reason is, if we took somebody like Rafael Barbosa, who we were just talking about, and we put an identical carbon copy of him in a civilian capacity, we said, okay, for the next 23 years, you're going to live as a civilian, 9 to 5, sit at a desk, you're going to take the freeway, but that'll be the most you're going to, be at risk, right? Or you're going to be flying in some of the most hostile territory in the world, and you're going to be exposed to these toxic things. Our military and our government know that person is going to turn out different than their civilian counterpart. And that's why these programs exist, right? That's why we offer these programs, and that's why they're so great, and that's why I help families take advantage of these that they've earned. And I think the stigma of calling it a disability claim is the starting point. it's something that you've earned as a military member, right? The same way you earned education benefits, the same way that in some cases, your spouse may earn medical. In some cases, you've got retirement. Some cases they've received, discharge related to some medical emergency or care. It's one of those things that if you can't do it for yourself, do it for your family. Right? I mean, if your bumper got ripped off on 95 in an automobile accident, are you going to be too proud to file a claim with Geico? I mean, I don't think so, right, Scott? I mean, I could be wrong.
That depends. Did I hit them or did they hit me?
Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, your coverage, you may still have coverage either way because we're in a no-fault state, especially if you have an injury. Property damage is probably another story, but
it's not the same circumstance as someone who actively introduces themselves into a danger zone, into a dangerous situation, on the purpose of that being their job, of that being their assignment, their order. It's one thing to step out the door and, take the risk of participating in the world. It's another thing to pledge your service to a country and take up service against hostile forces. That's a separate kind of scenario.
Agreed. And a lot of the scars and injuries we may not even be able to see, right? And that's another thing. That's a topic for a different day about some of the areas that I think we can really make strides to help our military families, right? Because it's not always a broken limb, a torn ligament. There are plenty of injuries that somebody can experience, right? PTSD, traumatic brain injury, that you can't see from just looking at them.
And some things are just simple incidents that, if caught early, could be addressed, could be corrected, or could be excised. And given time and unawareness, they're just allowed to exacerbate.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes me so proud of where we're at right now with the Honoring Our Pact Act is that for everything that everybody disagrees on in this country, right? I mean, you couldn't find an issue that people agree on, but thank God for the bipartisan legislation. It looks like we can all come together on one thing, and that is those that served deserve this. There is one thing and one main reason why I wanted to spend the show talking about it. Absolutely stunning to me. There are, and again, without getting political, this is just the reality. There are a group of folks in the Senate, I think they're in the Republican Party, surprisingly, that don't want to pass the Honoring Our Pact Act, the portion of the Camp Lejeune water exposure. And the reason is it's going to provide a new federal tort claim for families in the Eastern District of North Carolina. What does that mean? I'll break that down for you folks. They don't want the plaintiff firms representing people, right? You see all these asbestos and different commercials, the 3M and the Roundup and the or whatever. I can't remember.
Zantac or something
yeah,
like that.
I can't remember what the
heartburn thing.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Zantac or one of the Z's, that there's a mass tort about. And I understand that sometimes it can be frustrating to drive through the state of Florida and you can't open your eyes without seeing some sort of legal advertising. But the reality is, by sticking it to the plaintiff firms, right? Because you don't want the plaintiff firms making any money, which, by the way, the plaintiff firms do it contingent, right? We don't charge anyone up front, which some of these other firms do. By sticking it to the plaintiff firms, you're really hurting military families, right? I mean, the objective is to help military families. If you have an issue, that's what some of these state agencies are for. But don't take it out on the military family because you want to hurt, another group of society. And that's one of the most alarming things is that it overwhelmingly passed the House in March of 2022. I think it's in front of the Senate right now. It might have just been kicked back with some revisions, but I think that the burn pit portion that's going to survive is, they've got some of the things that they've come up with that's passed so far, they've got priority group 6 healthcare for at least, again, 3.5 million toxic exposed veterans. They've got extensions for combat eligibility. So, the healthcare from 5 to 10 years, they're going to have a 1-year open enrollment. They're going to basically concede that exposure to airborne hazards and burn pits are basically based off of if you can show, and most of the time you can, right? Your DD-214 or one of those military personnel records will show, all right, I served here on this date, right? And basically these are all things that are on Congress's website talking about this bill. So I'm reading, I want to be clear, I'm reading exactly what is included. But again, this act, some of these acts are over 100 pages. So for me to boil it down in bullet points, I want to make sure I'm clear. This is all based off of what they're doing in D.C. And they're going to concede medical exposure. They're going to require medical exams and opinions for certain veterans that have toxic exposure disability claims. They're going to add hypertension and a couple of others. I'm not entirely sure where they were going besides hypertension, but that's for the Agent Orange exposure. So Agent Orange is similar to the types of weed killer that you'd see. Some of the clients that I have that talk about spraying that in Vietnam, incredible stories. I mean, apparently you spray it on a forest and everything dies. I mean, seems,
and they do mean everything.
Right. Seems pretty clear that, when you're mixing up a drum of that to then go spray it out, if everything's dying, you're breathing that in, it's probably not good. And some of these other presumptions, basically expanding training and resources, developing a list. So, one of the biggest things too is that it really shouldn't. The onus shouldn't be on the veteran and the military family to be like, all right, let me track down this and jump through these hurdles to figure out what I'm eligible for. It should be, hey, you served in this area or in this time period. Here's what you're entitled to, right? And when I say entitled, they earned it.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, it's not like, oh, you're in, it's not like
it's not a handout, it's a receipt.
Yeah. It's not the worst thing when I say entitled. I'm not talking about something that they didn't earn. I'm talking about something that they've earned. And that is the thing that absolutely kills me. I can't look at my phone. I can't open up a web page. I can't do anything without seeing, all right, today Congress approved, however many billions of dollars going God knows where overseas, or going to somebody that's frankly not sacrificed what these military families have. And I don't, I'm not sitting on this show to take away from someone else. That's not my purpose. But I am sitting here saying, hey, if you're going to give it to them, why not give it to these military families that have sacrificed, right? And I think that the priority of burn pits and the priority of really dialing in the families that have had this toxic exposure, right? The civilian families. And there were even claims in this Honoring Our Pact Act for the children in utero. I mean, that is, if you were in utero in let's say you're in utero in 1985 and your family was living on Camp Lejeune base and your parents were drinking the water and you were conceived and then you grew up to have these lifelong ailments that weren't genetic and nobody else in your family had them, and you're now an adult living with this, and you're saying, that's weird. Nobody else in my family ever had this condition. Well, that's the part of this that's so interesting to me, is that the information is just a trickle of what is probably out there. And I think that finally, thank God, our government is starting to do the right thing, and they're going to hopefully pass this and provide our military families and civilian families that were exposed to Camp Lejeune toxic water some relief. And if you want to help out, here's what you do. And I've got clients in about 30 states. I've got some that listen all over, and they rewatch on brochulaw.com. I've got a YouTube series too. You can check that out. Social media, Brochu Law. But you got to call your congressman. You got to call your senators. You live in Florida, pick up the phone. You call Marco Rubio. You call Rick Scott, and you tell everybody that when you go back to D.C., they better pass this through. It's like, think about all the people that served in the military, right? Even if you didn't, everybody knows an uncle or a child or a parent or somebody.
Wasn't there like a survey they just did that said like 1 in 4 people in any given family has either served or knows someone who's served? So the level of interconnectedness that we have in American society to social relations to those who have served in the military is just outstanding. There are so many people that we interact with on a daily basis, and maybe we don't know about that firsthand, but that doesn't change the dynamic of what they've been through, and it doesn't change the dynamic of what they've experienced as a result of that, and certainly ought to increase their eligibility to receive some resource against that.
Exactly, and importantly, the same support that we gave those service members that were heading overseas and the same support we gave to their families when their loved ones were deployed is the same spirit and motivation that we need to protect them now, right? Because for the longest time, we were talking about how we have a war in Afghanistan, a war in Iraq, the whole world's going to, hell in a handbasket, right? And what we've got to do is, we've got to now evaluate where are our priorities. Well, we're not in any major conflict any longer, right? So what do we need to do? We need to turn our focus to those military families that have sacrificed for the last 20 years, because God knows with what's going on right now in the world, we may be in another conflict eventually at some point. So let's focus right now on what we can do to be proactive and help those that served. And there's no reason right now why we can't, because we're not in an active conflict. There's no reason we can't help them. It's just, can we focus on this topic and generate enough people that care about it? That's truly what we're up against. And I think given some of the bigger names that have now noticed that this act is important and helps a significant number of families, I'm confident that they'll do the right thing.
They've certainly got the opportunity, and we've demonstrated recently that Congress is able to make quick decisions and pass effective legislation quickly when they're motivated to do so. And like you said, if we can be this gung-ho about supporting troops, about supporting the people who are going forth into action, why can't we show that same consideration after the fact? Guys, we appreciate your service, and what can we do to improve your quality of life now that you've come home? Exactly. Well, you can reach out to Chris Brochu at case@brochulaw.com if you want to get some more information on today's show, or if you've got some legal matters that you need help with. Again, that's case@brochulaw.com. And feel free to give us a call at 855-765-1045 if you'd like to jump into the conversation. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back for the second half of Brochu Law here on Sunday morning on WOKV. Jacksonville, you are listening to 104.5 WOKV, Jacksonville's News and Talk, and it is Brochu Law coming at you right now. We're continuing our conversation about burn pits. And Chris, what more can you tell us about what's going on with that topic today?
I think that the biggest thing that we're kind of working through right now with some of the burn pit legislation and some of the stuff that we're seeing is the fact that these are extremely time sensitive in nature because of the fact that if you are exposed to burn pits and it goes undiagnosed or mistreated or misdiagnosed, right? Like let's say you don't have correct diagnostic testing, or maybe there wasn't diagnostic testing ordered. A number of potential harms exist in the future. And your potential health could be at risk. So I think that's why it's so crucial right now that we move this legislation through, and we're gonna hopefully be able to get to a point where we know, okay, these types of things, right? And I've got some other cases right now that, I don't want to leave any teasers or hangers out there, but with some interesting issues related to asbestos and other things at some installations, again, whether they're military or a contractor's location or facility, we're still trying to figure that out. But these types of things that are common knowledge that the average industry person could understand and wrap their head around, we just need to get better about acknowledging it. And again, it's not necessarily, hey, who can we point the finger at? It's just, hey, we know that this happened. Let's fix it. Right? I mean, that's the bottom line here.
Yeah, and the important thing about it, particularly with regards to the Honoring Our Pact Act, it isn't about finger pointing or accusations. It's not about any kind of pursuit of accountability. What it is about pursuit of care resource. It's about giving some deserved response to the people who are in positions to be exposed to these toxic circumstances.
Exactly. And for those of you that are just starting to tune in, I know we just hit the 7:00 hour, so we might have some more listeners. We've got a number of important things included in a new act that was just passed by the House, Honoring Our Pact, PACT Act. This is also an area that we talked about on the last live show, where we kind of talked about different things related to that legislation, Camp Lejeune. The important thing to know about this new Honoring Our Pact Act, bipartisan legislation that will hopefully provide relief to at least, I think the conservative estimate is 3.5 million veterans that were exposed. So 3.5 million families, just think spouses, children, relatives. And hopefully, if we can get the treatment in place, the resources, and the screening, we can catch a lot more health conditions before they get to the point of no return. And for those of you that missed it earlier, we were talking about a client of mine that is sort of spearheading this movement, or one of the figureheads. He is, highly involved with Burn Pit 360. He was with Jon Stewart on Fox News, and his name's Rafael Barbosa. Again, I'm not saying anything privileged. This is all stuff you can see when he went on Fox News or reading the papers, or you may have heard him at his rally in D.C. talking about it. But it's basically just about the fact that we know that there are so many military families that are experiencing a loved one that has negative health complications related to burn pit exposure, and hopefully this new act will help assist them get medical care resources, and start creating a list of, okay, if you served in these areas, right, these provinces, on these dates, or at these facilities, at this FOB, you likely were exposed to this, because you don't have to be the person throwing the tire on the pile to be exposed to a burn pit, right? I mean, you could be doing anything around base from the stories I've heard, and the amount of smoke that's billowing depending on the wind direction, everybody's breathing it in, right? I mean, if you're over there breathing air, you probably got exposed to burn pit if that was one of the issues.
Right, and the wind carries it in every direction, and depending on some of the things that you're burning, some of that stuff, it may incinerate, float up in the atmosphere, and be fine. Some of that's some heavy material. Some of that is some carcinogenic material, and it lingers. It doesn't soar real high. It gets heated up. It floats so far on the air currents, but the wind is taking it in every which direction. The spread of it can reach for miles. There's all sorts of opportunity of exposure, whether intentional or simply as a discovery after the fact, that chemicals being burned, materials being burned, waste materials being burned, things that you don't necessarily think about, particularly stuff that you might even deal with industrially. But you deal with it industrially in a controlled environment, a different circumstance. You don't deal with it where the fumes and the chemicals themselves are able to just float out freely into the atmosphere and into the environment around that. And that's what these guys are having to deal with. That's what so many families are coming back from service having experienced, and now, years later, they're finding all of these complications arising from it.
Certainly, the tires and hazardous waste and limbs and fuel and anything else that can be burned or is burned, or you're breathing in the fumes of it burning, certainly could be included in that.
And it's not necessarily just the stuff around bases either. It's anything in the fields of service. If folks were working in a combat zone and enemy soldiers decided they didn't want you to have access to certain resources, what's the best way to get rid of it? Destroy it. Remember when we had the first round of the Gulf War and all of the oil fields were burning, and you could see that from space.
That's a great example.
Here's the thing. If you can see it from space, you're hurting people on Earth.
Yeah, I would say that's fair characterization. And we didn't talk about that one, but exactly, the Gulf War, if you've got any service time from that period, obviously there are presumptions of service connection from a number of service periods. And I think that's really the biggest thing. It's not, hey, what can we blame on the government, right? I mean, there are things that the government has admitted that they may have gotten wrong, right? And there are things that the VA has admitted before that they may have gotten wrong. And I think the point isn't, there are times that you have to say, hey, you got this wrong, make it right. And I think that there are times when they will admit that they got something wrong. And I think importantly, it's not who can we point the finger at, but can we just get it right? Can we come together and get it right?
And in some of these cases also, it may be too late to get it right, but you can at least get it better. And you can do something for the families that are suffering. You can do something for the families that will be left after circumstances have taken their worst turn.
Right.
And that's something that we could be proactive on. That's something that legislation could serve to protect the families involved and protect those descendants of the families involved.
Exactly. And that's why I want you to talk to your congressman. I want you calling them. If you live in the state of Florida, call Marco Rubio, call former governor, senator, call Rick Scott, call your House reps. If you live out of state, right? I've got military clients in about 30 different states. Call up your congressmen and women. And the reason is this still hasn't passed the Senate. Plenty of bills die after they get out of the House, or they'll get amended and they'll get rid of some of the best parts of a bill. Call up your politicians and let them know that their constituents want this passed. And the main reason is I don't care about the dog and pony show or the I'm sorry's coming from DC. I don't care about that. The only thing I care about is action. So save the sorries, right, and get it done, because this is something that can't wait, truly. And
while you're in the process of making calls, if you'd like to jump into the conversation about this, you can give us a call at 855-765-1045. Got plenty of lines open, and we'd like to hear your opinions, or if you've got some experiences with this. Chris would certainly be interested in hearing that. Also, you're invited to check out case at brochulaw.com if you feel like you've got some legal issues or some legal concerns, and you can send those directly into Chris Brochu, and he will be following up with you at case at brochulaw.com.
Perfect. Thank you. We're going to kind of transition into a new topic here. It's going to be one of those topics that people will scratch their head and say, Chris, does this actually happen? And I'm going to unfortunately tell you it does. And obviously, it's not going to happen to everyone, but if it does happen to you or your family, it's important to know what to do. This is an example I'm going to give about a call that I recently screened from a service member that passed away, their family. But this would be applicable to a number of different life insurance scenarios too. And basically what I want to explain, and this is the part that's sad, is this is obviously a case where service member has passed away. She was murdered by her husband, who was also in the service. And essentially what happens when a service member dies, their SGLI, their service member group life insurance, right, pays out to whoever their beneficiary is. Now, in this particular case, the call that I screened from the family who was in, the Southeast had thankfully been listed as the beneficiary, so they didn't need to wait. But in most of these scenarios, these scenarios where you have somebody killing someone, there are laws in place called slayer where you can't kill someone for, they call it a pecuniary gain. You can't kill someone for money, right? So in this particular case, there were two service members, and they both had service member group life insurance. They had been recently married. One of them had their mother, and the husband had his relatives, right? We never truly found out who it was, but they never put each other on. So the question becomes, on their beneficiary forms, when the wife service member passes away, obviously her husband, who is in the Army, who killed her, doesn't get any, money or proceeds, even if he was beneficiary. So it would go to her family. But his policy, because it's a federal life insurance policy, goes to his family. And it's not available to go after from the victim's family, which if this was a different scenario, right? If this was, say, a term life insurance or something else where, in the state of Florida, you have elective share and you've got some of these other things. I know certain states, like I had a life insurance case in California where there's a community property issue that we litigated. But what happens is, because it's a federal policy, even if he killed her, he was a service member too, right? He's in the Army. So his family gets his proceeds. So the victim's family doesn't get anything. They got her life insurance, but they still come home without their daughter. And his family, who, he killed, my client's daughter, right? His wife, he killed her and then killed himself. His family gets his life insurance, even though in my view, I think it probably belongs to the victim's family for what he did. But it's one of those things where, because it's governed by federal law, none of these state statutes come into play, because there's this thing called preemption, which is a fancy legal word for when you have a federal law and a state law that conflict, the federal law wins, right? So it's one of those issues that I've seen recently, and I've dealt with it in the past. Obviously, we don't pay beneficiaries that kill the insured, right? But what happens in this unique scenario where the victim can't go after their policy because it's under this federal statute? And that's one of the questions that I think is really puzzling me, is how do we make that better, right? Because that is at least the third or fourth story like this that I've heard in the last couple years. And I know if I've heard three or four, I mean, there have to be plenty more out there. But I think that the bottom line is, if you or a loved one have a life insurance policy, and you've heard me say this on plenty of shows before, you gotta just make sure that you cross all your bases, because when your loved one passes away, you're not going to necessarily be thinking as clear as you did when they were alive. And some things may fall through the cracks that if you don't address in a timely manner, you may never get the chance to. So the best thing to do, if your loved one has a life insurance policy, is you say, hey, if this isn't paid, right, when I pass away, if this isn't paid within 30 days of you submitting my death certificate and a beneficiary claim form, something's up. You better be calling a lawyer. You better be calling someone, because chances are good the life insurance company is either gearing up to deny your claim, they're investigating it further to figure out what they can do to deny it, or they're getting ready to pay someone else that maybe you didn't know about. And there are all these scenarios that we've talked about, and we'll talk about some more. But ones where we've got last-minute beneficiary changes, right? I mean, I've got this case in Texas where we're arguing over some of those facts right now. Kind of sensitive. Once we get to a conclusion, we'll see if that's something to talk about.
And something that's super helpful in matters like that is making sure that your family members know where to find this information. Make sure that your records are up to date. Make sure that they are kept in a place that is accessible. Because if you keep them in a safe and you've got the combination and you're dead, that's not helping anybody. If you keep them stored up on in some file on a drive under a secured password and you're the only one that knows it, that's not helping anybody. But if you got that information available for your family, then when they need it, it's there for them. And it's while you're at it, take advantage of the opportunity and maybe lay out some advanced directives. Best time to do that is when you're young and healthy and thinking ahead, so that you're not compromised by some of the additional concerns of the stress of the moment or the anxieties of medical treatments and health conditions, and also so that there can be no dispute about your veracity of mind, so that someone can't come along and say, oh, well, I'm not sure they were really competent when they thought about this. So other things to consider. And
the hard part is sometimes, it goes the other way, right? Sometimes it's the kids that are left hung out to dry. That's a common scenario I see too. You've got somebody in a position of power that is, almost a fiduciary, if you will. Maybe if they don't have power of attorney status, but they're that close with the insured or whatever party you have. And they say, oh yeah, we're going to do the right thing. Don't worry. When you pass away, we're going to get that money or to whatever relative you want. And then come to find out the loved one dies, the family member dies. What happens? Oh no, they never said that. Here's
the thing, man. Handshakes are only good in movies.
Yeah.
Get it in writing.
Always get it in writing.
Make sure your attorney has a copy of it.
And the best thing that you said too, Scott, is the fact that your loved ones don't need to know, hey, I've got $9,000 at Bank of America in a checking account. I've got $36K in this account. I've got X in my 401k, right? We don't need to know that, right? Here's what you need to know. Hey, my checking and my savings, yeah, they're at Chase. My 401k is here. Here's my life insurance. It's with Northwestern or whatever, right? I just made all that up. But that's all they need to know, because then what you do is after that, now you've at least got a crumb to figure out where you're going. And I should probably do an episode on this, but what is the importance of saving and doing all these things for your loved one to you sprint the marathon, you get to mile 26, and then what do? You just hang it up and go home? No, you got to finish it out, right? Finish it out. Why would you be saving all these years to leave your kid with a funeral home assignment? You didn't cover that. Why would you make them have to jump through all of these hoops that if you just named them as a beneficiary, it would have been avoided? Or better yet, you could have avoided having to pay all these creditors at the end of your life had you just named them as a beneficiary instead of naming your estate, right? Because anything that avoids probate is not only non-taxed, but it's not subject to creditors, right? So when people are leaving all this money to their estate and they're super excited, right? It's not the best way or method to do it. And I think most people don't realize that when you die, it doesn't just go away. What happens is you might not have to deal with these issues, but now it's actually even worse because that company or that bank that you've dealt with for 20 years, your loved one's got no connection to them. And now they're having to work out all these questions and do things. Leave them a crumb, write it all down, and figure it out.
It's a weird topic. It's you feel funny talking about it. Nobody wants to sit around and have that conversation. But it's a conversation you need to have.
It is. And you know why I never feel uncomfortable talking about it? Because
Well, partly because you're in the business of taking care of people's interests, so that's your nature. It's what you do.
And not only that, but so many people come to me after a loved one dies and just like, where do we even start, right? I mean, what do we do? And again, the other part of this too is that, if let's say you're a beneficiary and somebody comes along and they say, you know what, Scott, we don't think that you're entitled to this money, right? As a beneficiary, we're going to challenge that. Well, there are things that you can do to try to get the insurance company to pay. Or let's say you're cut out, right? And you say, hey, my loved one told me for years and years and years, don't worry, Scott, you're gonna be set up, you're gonna be fine. And then all of a sudden one day they pass through the pearly gates, and next thing you know, that policy is actually left to somebody else. And you start thinking to yourself, well, they didn't change that. They told me all the time about it. So and what's important about that? If you've got a defense as to why they shouldn't pay out this new party, you've got to bring it to that insurance company, because if that life insurance company pays it out, they've now paid the money. So now you've got to go after the insurance company, right? And you've got to say, hey, they paid the wrong party. Whereas if you say, hey, here's why you shouldn't pay it out, what the life insurance company does is they say, hey, if we think that there are two genuine issues here, we're not going to get involved. We're going to file it in federal court, deposit the funds with the court, and let the two parties that may be entitled to it duke it out. So that's what you got to contend with. And I guess just to kind of put a bow on that topic, write down the name of an attorney, especially for the life insurance stuff. Honey, if this happens to me, right? Here's who you call. If this life insurance isn't after you submit a death certificate and a claim form, isn't in your bank account within 30 days, you got to call this lawyer. You got to do something. Because I'm telling you right now, your spouse having to Google that information after you pass away and only getting 30 days to do it while they're trying to plan your funeral, it's just insane. It truly, I can't imagine the amount of stress going through somebody's mind at that point. I guess the final story I'll tell, because we got about 20 seconds left before we go off air. So I met Brian Kilmeade this week, radio show. He was in studio. We had lunch, and he was a super guy, staunch supporter of our military families, and he provided some pretty good radio tips. So I'm looking to improve, but if you get a chance, listen to his show 9 to noon, and I think he's on Fox too. But
yeah, he's got quite a bit of Fox programming. He's on there more often than not. But you can check him out right here on WOKV, 9 to noon, Monday through Friday, the Brian Kilmeade Show. And, of course, every Sunday morning here with Chris Brochu and Brochu Law. If you enjoyed today's show, you want to get a video version of it, you can find it at brochulaw.com. That's courtesy of our friend Justin at Nova Productions. And, of course, feel free to reach out to Chris at case@brochulaw.com if you want to get more information on today's show, or if you've got some legal matters that you need help with. Again, that's case@brochulaw.com. Chris, pleasure working with you this morning.
Thanks, Scott.
Have a great morning, Jacksonville.